She stood there in zero gravity, surrounded by hybrid roses that defied two worlds. That which serves only itself serves the universe, she said, her voice echoing through the arboretum. But when she turned to me, her mask seemed to shift with unspoken meaning. What happens when beauty isn't just about appearance, but about survival? The air on the bridge hummed with a familiar tension, the kind Elias Cole had navigated for 27 years. He read people the way he read star charts. Posture, eye contact, micro-expressions. These were his navigation points through human diplomacy. His record spoke for itself. 12 successful treaties, 7 conflict resolutions, 0 first contact disasters. He trusted what he could see. Then came the Astra mission. This wasn't another trade negotiation with territorial Centurions or those methane breathers from Kepler 22b. The Fensari were different. Their communications were layered, their customs undocumented. The mission brief felt like trying to read a star map with half the constellations missing. His ship AI, Arya, loved pointing that out. Her voice cut through his thoughts like a laser scalpel, running facial recognition protocols on our guest commander. Estimated success rate 0%. Might I suggest actual diplomacy instead of your usual stare and intimidate technique? Elias ignored her. He adjusted his uniform, the fabric stiff against his shoulders. He'd earned his rank when diplomacy meant strong handshakes and looking the other party in the eye. You sized someone up in 3 seconds. You decided if they were threat or ally. That system worked, until it didn't. Humanity built its entire approach to alien relations on visual cues, the assumption that everyone communicated the same way, that everyone wanted to be seen and understood through familiar expressions. Elias represented the last of the old guard, the generation that learned diplomacy before we knew we weren't alone in the universe. His practical confidence was a shield. Underneath it, a deep, unspoken doubt. What if the rules he'd built his career on were wrong? What if some species didn't play by human rules at all? The stage was set for a collision, not of ships, but of traditions. Human assumptions meeting alien complexity. Elias stood at the center of it, a man about to discover that everything he knew was a liability. Then the airlock cycled. Elira stepped onto his bridge. Her movements were fluid, unnatural. And the mask, it wasn't static. It shifted like liquid metal, patterns swirling across its surface in response to something. Emotions, thoughts. He had no reference point. His training kicked in automatically. Assess the subject. Read the cues. But the mask gave him nothing familiar. No smile, no frown, no raised eyebrows. Just those ever-changing patterns that meant nothing to him. Arya's voice was unusually quiet. Biological scanning complete. No match in any database. Cultural analysis suggests the mask is integral. Elias felt the ground shift under his feet. His entire approach, the quick judgments, the visual assessments, was useless. She challenged his perceptions just by standing there. The rules had changed. He just didn't know the new ones yet. He maintained his commander's posture, but inside the foundations were cracking. This wasn't going to be like any negotiation he'd ever run. The mask shifted on its own. Not like metal or glass, more like light moving across water. Patterns swirled across its surface. Complex geometric shapes that melted into organic forms, then reshaped into something entirely new. Elias found himself staring, trying to decode a language he didn't understand. It wasn't concealment. That much became obvious immediately. The mask responded to her. When she spoke, faint ripples moved across its surface like heat haze. When she listened, the pattern slowed, deepened, layered like sedimentary rock. It was a living interface, a second skin that communicated what her actual face might have shown, if Fensari had faces like humans. The patterns represented concepts humans lacked words for. Translated fragments appeared on Elias's datapad. Shared silence, contained joy, protected truth. The translations felt incomplete, like trying to explain color to someone who'd only seen black and white. Scanners couldn't crack it. Medical imaging showed nothing but ambient energy readings. Material analysis returned contradictory results, sometimes metallic, sometimes organic, sometimes neither. Arya's voice held a rare note of frustration. It's like scanning a ghost, Commander. The readings keep changing. It's either alive or it's the most sophisticated piece of tech we've ever encountered. The mask served multiple purposes. Protection, yes, physical barrier against foreign atmospheres and microorganisms. But also communication. Elira explained that the patterns told stories. The swirl near her temple represented the Great Migration. The subtle lattice across her cheekbone marked philosophical debates that spanned centuries. Humans documented their history in books and databases. Fensari wore theirs. Elias realized he was negotiating blind. His entire playbook relied on reading micro-expressions, the subtle tightening around eyes, the slight smile that meant genuine pleasure rather than politeness. With Elira, he had nothing. Her body language remained controlled, elegant. The mask did all the talking. And he didn't speak its language. The power imbalance was instant and total. She could read him, the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when negotiations stalled. He could only guess what those shifting patterns meant. Was that swirling motion impatience? Curiosity? Offense? Every protocol he'd mastered became worthless. The respectful pause after speaking. The careful mirroring of posture. The strategic smile to build rapport. None of it worked. His training assumed common ground. Shared understanding of what a face should do. He tried to compensate by focusing on her voice, but even that held unfamiliar cadences. Her sentences flowed differently. Her pauses fell in unexpected places. The mask wasn't just hiding her face, it was reshaping their entire interaction. This stopped being about trade agreements about 5 minutes into their first meeting. The mineral rights negotiation, the cultural exchange proposals, the territorial boundaries, all of it became secondary. The real negotiation was happening underneath. Two species trying to find a common language, two individuals learning to communicate without the visual cues that had always guided them. Elias set his datapad aside. He stopped trying to analyze the patterns. Instead, he watched them, not as code to break, but as expression to understand. The mask wasn't a barrier. It was an invitation to look deeper, to listen differently, to communicate without the shortcuts humans had always relied on. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me about the pattern that's forming now. The one that looks like branching coral. Elira's head tilted. The pattern shifted again. Slower this time, softer. Elias leaned back in his chair. The familiar creak of leather a small comfort. When words failed, humor always worked. It was his go-to move in tense negotiations. He tried one of his stock openers, a story about Centurion trade ministers who'd once tried to pay their debts in chocolate bars. He delivered it perfectly. The timing, the deadpan expression, the slight raise of his eyebrows at the punchline. Elira's mask didn't shift. The patterns remained calm, flowing in slow, measured waves. She waited a full 3 seconds after he finished. Your anecdote suggests a transactional miscalculation based on cultural misunderstanding. The humor appears to derive from the incompetence of the ministers. Is laughter the appropriate response to failure? Elias blinked. Well, it's funny because it's absurd. Chocolate? The Centurion cocoa derivative is a valuable commodity on 12 worlds, she said, her voice even. Their offer may have been more serious than you assumed. He tried another one. A lighter joke about a misunderstanding with a translation device. This time her mask did change. The patterns sharpened into tight, angular shapes that looked concerning. You find humor in the potential for catastrophic miscommunication? She asked. The tone wasn't accusatory. It was analytical, like a scientist studying a strange new rock. On my world, such errors have led to conflicts that lasted generations. We do not joke about words. Elias felt the ground slide out from under him again. His greatest diplomatic weapon had just misfired. Humor was supposed to build bridges, not highlight canyons. Elira tilted her head. A soft chime sounded from the device on her wrist. Analysis complete. I comprehend the structural mechanics of 67% of your attempts at humor. The remaining 33% rely on cultural context I lack, or emotional triggers that do not align with Fensari psychology. She wasn't offended. She was running diagnostics on his jokes. You often use self-deprecation, she continued. This is curious. Diminishing your own status to put others at ease. We would interpret that as a sign of uncertainty or poor leadership. What humans found funny, Fensari found confusing, or worse, threatening. A joke about a clumsy android was seen as cruelty to artificial life. A pun was viewed as a deliberate corruption of language. His strength had become a weakness. The exchange stopped being about trade talks. It became a dissection of communication itself. They spent the next hour pulling apart jokes like engineers reverse engineering a machine. Why did humans laugh at surprise? Why did Fensari value precise language over playful ambiguity? Elias found himself explaining concepts he'd never questioned. Sarcasm, irony, the fact that sometimes people say the opposite of what they mean to emphasize a point. Elira listened, her mask now displaying patterns he was starting to recognize as intense concentration. Complex interlocking lattices of light. He realized she was fascinated. This wasn't a failure. It was a discovery. They weren't failing to connect. They were building a new kind of connection, one analysis at a time. She offered a Fensari equivalent, a form of wordplay based on harmonic resonance and historical allusion. It made no sense to him, but he appreciated the complexity, the attempt to share something from her world. The mutual fascination became the real bridge. Not the jokes themselves, but the shared curiosity about why they worked or didn't. They had found neutral ground in their confusion about each other. The Arboretum offered, the first space that didn't belong to either of them, weightless, neutral, a capsule of green life floating between stars and species. Hybrid roses drifted through the air, their petals holding colors that shouldn't exist in nature, deep blues fading into metallic golds, living proof that fusion could create something new. Something beautiful. Elias watched one float past his face. We grow these on orbital stations. Human-Fensari collaboration. Took 17 years to get the genetics right. Elira reached out, her gloved fingers not touching the flower but tracing its path. That which serves only itself serves the universe, she said. Her mask patterned with soft concentric circles. An old teaching, Elias nodded. We have something similar. About beauty being more than skin deep. Your saying reduces the concept, she replied. The patterns tightened slightly. It suggests something must be deep to have value. For us, beauty is an action, a function. These flowers serve cross-pollination, atmospheric regulation, psychological comfort. Their beauty is their utility. He tried to humanize it. So they're pretty and useful. Best of both worlds. That is not what I said. Her voice remained calm, but the mask's patterns sharpened. You simplify to make it fit human frameworks. The teaching means that nothing exists in isolation. Even isolation itself serves the greater whole. They floated there among the drifting blossoms, two species debating the nature of beauty itself. For Elias, beauty was personal, subjective, something to appreciate or dismiss. For Elira, it was interconnected, functional, a quality that existed in relationship to other things. The environment became part of their negotiation. A petal brushed against Elias's cheek. Another caught in the energy field around Elira's mask, hovering just centimeters from the surface. Fragile, temporary, like the trust they were building. Elias shared human customs. First dates, job interviews, diplomatic meetings, how people dressed to impress, how they judged each other in seconds based on appearance, how entire futures could hinge on a good haircut or the right suit. Elira listened, her mask now showing patterns he hadn't seen before. Slow, thoughtful spirals. We also use appearance, but as communication, not judgment. The mask tells you who I am, what I value, where I come from. It is not meant to be attractive. It is meant to be true. They realized they were both right, and both wrong. Appearance did matter. It shaped every interaction, but it couldn't define worth. A beautiful flower still needed the right soil to grow. A masked diplomat still needed someone willing to understand the patterns. The roses floated between them, silent witnesses to the conversation. They didn't care about human or Fensari concepts of beauty. They simply were. Perfect hybrids existing in the space between definitions. Elias reached out and caught one of the drifting blossoms. He held it carefully, feeling the delicate texture of petals that combined two worlds. Maybe it's not about what beauty is. Maybe it's about what it does. Elira's mask softened into patterns that almost looked like approval. Now you understand. The flower's beauty isn't in its color. It's in its ability to make you stop, to make you think, to make us have this conversation. They floated in silence for a moment, two diplomats in a garden of impossible flowers, realizing they'd just had the most important negotiation of the mission. And it had nothing to do with trade agreements or territorial rights. It was about whether they could see each other clearly, even through masks and cultural barriers. The galley smelled of spices that didn't belong to either of their worlds. Cinnamon from Earth, something like crushed minerals from Elira's homeworld. and the sharp scent of citrus from the hybrid fruits growing in the ship's garden. Elias stirred the pot while Elira measured precise amounts of a fine blue powder. The meal was their first joint creation. A peace offering. A chance to build something together after the storm. "What's the worst that could happen?" Elias said, grinning as he added another dash of pepper. "A little culinary adventure." Elira's mask showed slow, cautious spirals. "The biochemical interactions are complex. Our species process certain compounds differently. There are potential reactions." He waved a spoon. "We scanned everything. No toxins, no allergens, just flavors." She placed a hand gently on his arm. The gesture was new, unscripted. "The risks are not about poisoning. They are about side effects. Temporary alterations." He stopped stirring. "What kind of alterations?" "Temporary chromatic shifts in skin pigmentation are possible. Your hands might turn blue for a few hours. Mine might adopt a more human tone. Enhanced auditory sensitivity could make normal conversation painful. The ship's hum might sound like a scream." Elira paused. The patterns on her mask tightened. "Most dangerously, there could be brief episodes of involuntary telepathy. A few minutes where surface thoughts are not private, where they broadcast." Elias set the spoon down. The light-hearted risk had just become a serious concern. He thought of all the things that floated through his mind. The doubts, the fears, the stray thoughts about her that were definitely not diplomatic. "It's a small chance," she said. "Perhaps 5%. But it exists." They stood there, looking at the simmering pot. The joke about biochemistry had become an immediate reality. This wasn't about food anymore. It was about trust, about how much they were willing to risk for a shared experience. Elias picked up the spoon again. "We've survived a solar storm together. I think we can handle some blue skin." He ladled the stew into 2 bowls. The steam rose between them, carrying scents of 2 worlds. They ate in silence at first. The flavors were strange. Earth spices fought with Fensari minerals, then found a balance. It was good. Better than good. It was something new. Then Elira's hand went to her temple. "The telepathic threshold is lower than I calculated." Elias felt it too. A strange pressure in his mind. Like a door that wasn't quite closed. He could hear the hum of the ship's engines, but also something else. A faint echo of thought that wasn't his own. A ripple of concern. A thread of curiosity. It was subtle, fleeting. His own thoughts felt suddenly exposed. The appreciation for the food. The worry about what she might hear. The unexpected fondness he felt sitting here with her. Elira met his eyes. Her mask pattern softened. "Your thoughts are quieter than I expected. Softer." The moment passed as quickly as it came. The mental door closed. The privacy returned. But something had changed. They had shared more than a meal. They had shared a moment of complete vulnerability. No masks, no filters, just 2 minds brushing against each other by accident. The blue skin never appeared. The auditory sensitivity didn't happen. But the telepathy did. For about 90 seconds, they knew each other in a way words could never achieve. It was overwhelming, terrifying. And somehow it made everything else seem simple. The meal became a stepping stone, not toward a treaty or an agreement, but toward a bond that existed beyond diplomacy. They had taken a risk together. And instead of breaking them, it had woven them closer. The shared vulnerability became the foundation. Stronger than any contract, deeper than any official agreement. They had chosen to risk their minds for the chance to understand each other better, and it had worked. The telepathic link lasted barely 2 minutes. It felt like a door being forced open, then slowly swinging shut. But in those 2 minutes, everything changed. Elias experienced her perceptions directly. The world through her senses wasn't just visual. It was layered. He felt the hum of the ship's engines as a physical vibration along his spine. He saw the color of his own thoughts. Warm gold shot through with flickers of anxiety. He understood why the mask was necessary. Her unfiltered perception was like watching a storm through a window versus standing outside in it. Surface thoughts slipped through, not deep secrets, but the constant stream of consciousness that usually stays private. He caught her worry about the diplomatic mission failing, her curiosity about why humans touch their faces when thinking, her appreciation for the way light caught the edge of his jaw. Things she'd never say aloud. He also felt her receive his thoughts, his concern about appearing foolish. His sudden awareness that his surface thoughts weren't always suitable for diplomatic review. The flicker of attraction he'd been carefully ignoring. The memory of his mother's voice telling him to stand up straight. The experience was overwhelming. Like trying to drink from a fire hose. Their minds weren't built for this. Human thoughts tended to be linear. One thing after another. Hers were simultaneous. Multiple streams of perception and analysis running parallel. It was beautiful and terrifying. They learned more in those 2 minutes than in weeks of negotiation. He understood her caution wasn't just cultural. It was protective. Her people didn't mask themselves to deceive. They masked themselves to avoid causing neurological overload, to give other species time to adjust. The incident forced a complete reconsideration of communication protocols. Everything they'd been doing was based on incomplete information. They'd been trying to build understanding while wearing emotional blindfolds. The telepathy, brief as it was, ripped those blindfolds off. Privacy became an immediate concern, not just as a concept, but as a physical need. When the link faded, they both sat breathing heavily. The return to mental solitude felt like sudden deafness. The silence inside their own heads was now noticeable. They had experienced true intimacy, and it was nothing like what either species had imagined. Elias looked at her mask with new understanding. It wasn't a barrier. It was a translator. A necessary filter that made interaction possible. He realized the Fensari hadn't been hiding behind their masks. They'd been meeting other species halfway, taking on the entire burden of translation themselves. The shared vulnerability became their foundation. They had seen each other's unedited thoughts. The fears, the hopes, the random mental clutter. There were no secrets in surface thoughts. Just truth. And instead of pushing them apart, it pulled them together. They sat in silence for a long time after the link broke. Not the awkward silence of before, but a comfortable quiet. The kind that exists between people who don't need words. The meal sat forgotten between them. The real nourishment had happened on a completely different level. When Elias finally spoke, his voice was quiet. So that's why you wear the mask. Elira's pattern shifted into something soft. Almost like a sigh. Yes, and also why we are often alone. It is difficult to find those willing to understand what lies beneath. The mind reading had been an accident. A side effect of shared food and chemistry, but it became the most honest communication they'd ever had. No masks, no filters, just two minds touching briefly in the dark, and choosing not to pull away. The first shudder felt like the universe itself had grabbed the ship and given it a hard shake. Warning lights bloomed across every panel. Class 7 solar storm, the kind that cracks hulls and fries electronics. The kind you survive in reinforced safe rooms or not at all. Elias grabbed Elira's arm, his grip firm. No time for diplomacy now. They moved through bucking corridors, the floor lurching under their feet. The safe room door hissed shut behind them, sealing them in a space barely large enough for two people. The roar of the storm faded to a dull, persistent hum through the thick walls. The air recycler whined, pushing the same air through filters over and over. It smelled of ozone and recycled oxygen. The ship groaned around them, a metal beast in pain. Elias braced himself against one wall, Elira against the other. The space was so small their knees almost touched. Well, Elias said, his voice tight. The universe certainly knows how to make an impression. It was the kind of joke he always made when things got bad. Deflect with humor. Hide the fear behind a smile. Elira's mask didn't show fear. It showed something else. The patterns had changed completely. Gone were the diplomatic swirls and measured lattices. Now it displayed sharp, rapid pulses of light that moved from the edges toward the center, like something was converging, focusing. It was the first time the mask looked like it was for protection. Your attempt at humor is noted, she said. Her voice was calm, but her hands were pressed flat against the wall behind her. The storm's intensity suggests we may be here for several hours. The conversation shifted. It had to. There was no point talking about trade routes or cultural exchange when the ship might be tearing apart around them. The pretenses fell away. They weren't commander and diplomat anymore. They were just two people in a metal box hoping it held. Elias told her about his first solar storm. A training mission gone wrong. How the silence afterward was worse than the noise. How he'd been sure he was going to die at 19. Elira spoke of Fensari storms. How their atmosphere sometimes turned inside out for days. How her people sheltered underground and told stories until it passed. Her mask's pattern softened slightly as she spoke of home. The pulses slowed, became more rhythmic. They talked about fear. Not in the abstract, but the specific, personal kind. Ilias admitted he hated small spaces. Always had. Illyra confessed that silence unnerved her more than noise. On her world, silence often meant something was wrong. The crisis accelerated everything. Disclosures that would have taken months of careful diplomacy came out in rushed sentences between the ship's groans. They shared childhood memories, lost loves, regrets, the things you only say when you're not sure you'll get another chance. The storm became a crucible. It burned away the formalities, the protocols, the careful distance they'd maintained. What was left was raw, real. Two people stripped of their roles, seeing each other clearly for the first time. The ship gave another violent shudder. A red light flashed above the door. Pressure warning. Elias met Illyra's masked gaze. No jokes this time. Just a look, an acknowledgement. They were in this together. Whatever happened next. The ship continued to groan around them, but the sound felt distant now. Secondary. Illyra's hands rested in her lap, the gloves looking almost ordinary in the dim emergency lighting.
She began with the official answer.
The one from the diplomatic briefings. The mask is a cultural artifact, she said, her voice steady. It protects against foreign contaminants. It honors our traditions of modesty and restraint in first meetings. It allows for measured communication. Elias nodded. He'd read that in the pre-mission packet. Standard procedure. Nothing surprising, then she paused. The patterns on her mask swirled slowly like ink dispersing in water. But you never asked the real question, she said. Humans never do. You accept the surface explanation. You assume the mask is for you, for your comfort. The hum of the recycler seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed. The mask is a biological necessity, she continued, her words precise. It is not just cultural. It is physiological. For my species, emotion is not a silent internal experience. It is emissive, projective. Without the mask, our emotional state would affect those around us. It would be overwhelming for a human nervous system. Unfiltered joy could cause sensory overload. Unfiltered grief could induce parallel despair. The mask regulates. It dampens. It translates intensity into patterns your mind can process without harm. Elias stared at her. The safe room felt suddenly smaller. The entire negotiation, every conversation, every shared moment in the Arboretum, it all reshaped itself in his mind. He hadn't been talking to Illyra. He'd been talking to a filtered version. A translation, a reduction of who she was designed for his protection. He understood the caution now. The careful distance. The way she'd pulled back sometimes for no reason he could see. It wasn't diplomacy. It was containment. She had been holding back parts of herself not out of secrecy, but out of mercy. The mask wasn't a barrier to communication. It was the only thing making communication possible. Without it, simply being in the same room with her could have been a neurological event, a beautiful, dangerous overload. He thought of the times he'd tried to make her laugh, the frustration he'd felt when his jokes didn't land. She hadn't been unfeeling. She'd been protecting him from the full force of her reaction. The mask absorbed what he couldn't handle. The revelation changed everything. It wasn't just about understanding her culture. It was about understanding the fundamental imbalance in their interaction. He had been free to express everything. She had been wearing a shield for his benefit. He looked at the mask, not as an obstacle, but as a piece of sophisticated life support technology. It served more purposes than he'd ever imagined. Protection, yes, but also a kindness. A deliberate lowering of her amplitude so he could hear her without being deafened. The storm outside was fading. The ship's groans grew less frequent. But inside the safe room, a different kind of turbulence settled. Elias had just learned that the person he was starting to trust was both more and less than he knew. The real Illyra existed beneath a layer of necessary silence, and he had no idea what would happen if that silence was ever broken. Her hands rested on the mask's edges, not yet lifting it. The patterns had stilled completely like frozen lightning. You assume it's about tradition, she said. Her voice was quiet, measured. The mask isn't just cultural. It's emotional armor. For both of us. The protection wasn't physical. Not really. The ship's environment posed no threat to her biology. The real danger was reaction. Human reaction. Other species' reactions. The mask prevented the initial shock, the fear, the revulsion that sometimes came when encountering something truly different. It gave everyone time to adjust. To see the person before seeing the form, she challenged him directly. Not with diplomacy now, with raw honesty. You could retreat, accept the safe version of me, the filtered one, or you could demand the truth, the unmasked reality, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The mask served both species. It protected Fensari from judgment. It protected humans from the neurological overload of their unfiltered presence. But it also created distance. It prevented true connection from forming. They could negotiate. They could even become friends. But they would always be interacting through a filter, a translation. Elira stood at the crossroads she'd been trained for her entire career. The moment every Fensari diplomat prepared for, the choice between safety and authenticity, between maintaining comfortable distance and risking real connection. Her entire life had led to this decision. Years of training, countless simulations, all designed to prepare her for the moment when someone might actually want to see behind the mask. Not out of curiosity, not as a power move, but out of genuine care. The implications stretched far beyond this room, beyond their personal bond. Her choice could affect interspecies relations for generations. If she removed the mask and he reacted with fear or disgust, it would confirm every caution her people had ever expressed about humans. If he accepted what he saw, it could open doors that had been sealed for centuries. This was the ultimate test of their bond, not of treaties or agreements, but of whether two beings from different worlds could look past biology, past appearances, past fear, whether they could choose vulnerability over familiar presumptions. She watched him, her hand still resting on the mask, waiting. The patterns remained motionless. The usual flow of information had stopped. This wasn't about communication anymore. It was about revelation. The silence in the room felt heavier than during the solar storm. Then the danger had been external, something they faced together. Now the danger came from within, from choice, from the decision to either maintain the safe distance they'd established or to risk everything for the chance to truly know each other. Elias understood the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about seeing her face. It was about accepting the responsibility that came with that knowledge. Once he saw what lay beneath, he would share the burden of that truth. The mask protected him as much as it protected her. Removing it meant accepting that protection was no longer necessary between them. The decision hung in the air, balanced between fear and possibility, between the safety of what they had built and the uncertainty of what they might build. The ultimate question wasn't whether he could handle what he saw. It was whether they were both willing to find out. Her hands rested on the sides of the mask. Not pulling yet, just holding. The offer hung between them, simple and enormous. "You have a choice," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "This is not required, but it is possible." She framed it as both personal risk and diplomatic necessity. The moment they either moved forward or settled for what they had, the invitation came with no promises. No guarantees of acceptance. She made that clear. "If you see me and cannot bear what you see, the treaty remains. Our professional relationship continues, but the personal connection, that may change. The risk was real, for both of them." She explained what lay beneath. Not in graphic detail, but in concepts. "My appearance does not follow human storytelling about aliens. It is not designed to frighten or charm. It simply is." The reality differed from holovids and novels. No green skin, no bug eyes. Nothing designed for human entertainment. Their appearance challenged human concepts of beauty. Not by being monstrous, by being different. The symmetry humans found pleasing, the proportions they considered ideal, these were Earth concepts. Fensari biology followed different rules, different needs, different evolution. Elias understood this was the point of no return. Once he saw her, he couldn't unsee her. The filtered version he knew would be replaced by reality. His reaction would determine everything. Their personal future, their professional relationship, the success of the mission itself. The moment stretched. Heavy with possibility, the air in the room felt still. Even the ship's usual hum seemed to quiet. They stood at the edge of something neither could predict. She didn't pressure him. The choice was his. He could accept the safe version, the diplomat he'd negotiated with, the filtered communication that protected them both. Or he could choose the unknown, the person behind the patterns. Elias looked at her hands on the mask, remembered the storm, the shared meals, the telepathic connection, the person who'd risked her mind to understand his jokes, who'd shared her fears in a shaking safe room. That person was real. The mask was just part of her. He thought about human history. First contact disasters that happened because people reacted with fear, because they couldn't see past differences. He thought about his own career. The treaties built on careful distance. The relationships that never quite touched truth. This was different. This was choosing connection over safety, choosing to see someone fully, knowing it might change everything. His voice was steady when he spoke. I want to see you, not the diplomat, not the representative you. The patterns on her mask shifted, not the controlled diplomatic patterns, not the sharp angles of formality, something softer, more open, like a door unlocking. They chose vulnerability together, not as a diplomatic strategy, not as a negotiation tactic, as a conscious decision to move beyond what was safe, to seek something real, even if it was difficult, even if it risked everything they'd built. The moment crystallized. Two people from different worlds, choosing to see each other, not through filters or translations, not through cultural assumptions or biological protections. Just as they were, the invitation had been made. The choice had been given, and instead of retreating to familiar ground, they stepped forward into unknown territory together. The mask remained in place for now, but the barrier between them had already begun to dissolve. Her hands moved with a ritual slowness that felt ancient, each movement precise, intentional. The mask didn't unlatch or unclasp. It responded to her touch, the edges softening, the material flowing like liquid under her fingers. The patterns that had once communicated so much now stilled completely, becoming a blank, dark surface. The silence in the room was absolute. No ship hum, no breath, just the quiet anticipation of revelation. Elias watched, his own breathing stilled as the mask lifted away. Not like removing a helmet, more like parting a curtain. What emerged defied every human expectation. Not grotesque, not monstrous, just profoundly, completely alien in ways no entertainment media had ever imagined. Her skin seemed lit from within, a deep violet that pulsed gently with each heartbeat. The light moved across her features in soft waves, creating patterns that shifted and flowed like living art. It wasn't a surface, it was a landscape. Her eyes were pools of liquid silver that held the reflected light of distant stars. They didn't have pupils or irises in the human sense, just depth, infinite depth that seemed to contain entire galaxies. When she blinked, the silver surface rippled slightly like water disturbed by a falling leaf. The face itself followed different rules of symmetry. The planes and angles didn't conform to human ideals of beauty. They followed their own logic, their own necessity. The nose wasn't a separate feature but flowed into the cheeks. The mouth curved in ways that suggested smiles humans had never imagined. Beauty existed on a completely different spectrum. Not better or worse, just different. The kind of difference that challenges everything you thought you knew about attractiveness, about what it means to be acceptable. This wasn't designed to frighten or charm. It simply was. A face that had evolved under different stars for different reasons. Every human assumption about appearance shattered in that moment. The 3-second judgments, the quick assessments, the entire system Elias had built his career on collapsed. This was beauty that couldn't be measured against human standards. It had to be understood on its own terms. The moment stretched, filled with unspoken questions. Would he pull back? Would fear take over? Would all their progress vanish in a single reaction? Elias didn't move, didn't speak, just looked, really looked. Not as a diplomat, not as a human assessing an alien, but as a person seeing another person for the first time. The mask had been a filter, a translation. This was the raw truth, the unmasked reality. The reveal changed everything. This stopped being about diplomacy, stopped being about treaties or first contact protocols. The professional distance vanished. What remained was personal, intimate. Two beings from different worlds seeing each other without filters for the first time. Romance wasn't about finding someone who fit your ideas of beauty. It was about discovering new ideas of beauty together. The moment the mask came off, their relationship shifted from diplomatic to personal, from negotiated to chosen. They were no longer commander and diplomat. They were just Elias and Elira, and everything that came before had been preparation for this moment of unfiltered seeing. The mask lay in her hands, inert now, just a piece of sophisticated technology that had once held so much meaning. Elira's true face remained unveiled, the violet light of her skin pulsing gently in the quiet room. Her voice when she spoke held both challenge and vulnerability, a mix he hadn't heard from her before. "Can you still love me like this, human?" The question hung between them, simple and devastating. It wasn't rhetorical. It was the ultimate test. Everything they'd built, the shared meals, the storm, the telepathic connection, the careful negotiations, all condensed into this single moment. This wasn't about diplomacy anymore. It was personal. Raw. The mission reduced to two people in a room, one asking a question that would define everything that came next. The question reframed their entire relationship. Love shifted from being about appearance to being about mutual acceptance. It wasn't, "Do you find me attractive?" but, "Can you accept what I am?" The distinction was everything. Attraction was fleeting. Acceptance was lasting. It required seeing past biology and into character. Elias understood then why they'd endured the journey. The solar storm, the failed jokes, the risky meal, the moments of unexpected connection, all of it led here, to this choice. His answer wouldn't just affect them. It would ripple outward. It would set a precedent. It would define how humans and Fensari interacted for generations. The universe seemed to pause. The usual hum of the ship faded into background noise. Even time felt like it had slowed, giving him space to think. To really consider the question. Not as Commander Elias Cole, diplomat, but as Elias, the man who'd shared fear in a safe room, who'd risked his mind over dinner, who'd learned to read patterns instead of expressions. He looked at her. Really looked. Not at the violet skin or the liquid silver eyes, not at the alien features that defied human beauty standards. He looked at the person he'd come to know, the one who'd analyzed his jokes with clinical precision, who'd quoted philosophy in a zero-gravity garden, who'd chosen vulnerability over safety. Her question wasn't about whether he could love something alien. It was about whether he could love her, the person behind the biology, the mind behind the mask, the heart that had chosen to trust him enough to ask this question. Beauty was redefined in that moment. Not by symmetry or familiar features, not by human standards of attractiveness, but by wonder, by the courage it took to be fully seen, by the trust it took to ask for acceptance. The most beautiful thing he'd ever seen was her willingness to risk rejection for the chance at real connection. His answer would determine their futures. Both personal and professional, they stood at a crossroads where one path led back to comfortable distance and the other led into unknown territory. The safe choice was to retreat, to say the treaty was enough. The brave choice was to step forward, to choose the person over the protocol. The moment stretched. The weight of it pressed down on both of them. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd built, hinged on a simple question and an honest answer. The universe waited, not with judgment, but with curiosity. What would the human choose? Safety or something new? The deeper meanings start coming into focus now. The mask wasn't just concealment. It was a cultural instrument, a complex piece of social technology designed to mediate interaction between species. Its shifting patterns weren't decoration. They were a language humans hadn't learned to speak yet. A visual representation of concepts we don't even have words for. Beauty stops being a monolithic standard. It becomes an expansive spectrum. What humans find attractive is based on symmetry, proportion, familiar features. The Fensari appearance challenges all that. Skin that pulses with inner light, eyes that hold galaxies, features that follow different evolutionary logic. It's not about what's pleasing to human eyes. It's about appreciating design that serves different functions. Beauty as utility, beauty as communication. The path to trust gets woven through shared experiences, meals that might turn your skin blue, jokes that misfire but become cultural studies, confessions made in shaking safe rooms during solar storms. The bonds form in unlikely places, under pressure, over questionable food, in moments where protocol fails and real connection takes over. Character and courage trump conventional aesthetics every time. Elias's reaction to the unveiled face isn't about finding her attractive by human standards. It's about recognizing the person he's come to know. the mind that analyzed his jokes, the spirit that quoted philosophy in zero gravity, the courage it took to remove the mask. That's what matters. Not whether her features match some arbitrary ideal. The story argues for empathy across radical difference. Not just tolerance, not just acceptance. Real empathy, the kind that requires effort, that demands looking past biological barriers and cultural programming, that chooses curiosity over fear when faced with the unfamiliar. It suggests that the most alien thing we might encounter is our own capacity to understand something completely different. It demonstrates storytelling's power to render speculative futures that feel immediate. The solar storm isn't just plot device, it's pressure cooker. The fusion meal isn't just dinner, it's risk and reward. The mask isn't just costume, it's character. Every element serves multiple purposes. World building through detail, theme through action. Thematic through lines connect human vulnerability to interspecies empathy. Elias's willingness to be vulnerable, to admit fear, to risk telepathy, to accept the unknown, becomes the bridge. His humanity isn't a weakness. It's the strength that allows connection. The story suggests that opening up might be more effective than armoring up when dealing with the unfamiliar. The narrative offers a template for sci-fi that explores moral dilemmas through character rather than lecture. The ethical questions aren't debated in abstract terms, they're lived, experienced. The dilemma of whether to maintain safe distance or risk real connection gets played out in personal terms. The political becomes personal. The theoretical becomes immediate. It's a story about seeing past surfaces, about recognizing that the most important things are often hidden behind layers of protection. That true connection requires the courage to both remove masks and to accept what's behind them. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see you, really see you, and trust that they'll still be there when the masks come off. The template works because it's human. Despite the aliens and spaceships and foot tech, at its core it's about two people trying to connect across barriers. That's why it resonates. That's why the symbolism lands. It takes universal human experiences, fear of rejection, desire for connection, struggle with difference, and scales them up to interstellar proportions. The stakes get higher, the differences get bigger, but the emotional truth remains familiar. Their private story carries planetary weight. The bond between a human commander and a Fensari diplomat could redefine how entire species interact. Their success or failure doesn't just affect two people. It affects billions who might follow their example. The stakes feel both enormous and personal. One relationship could change the course of interstellar politics. The Astra's mission becomes the new benchmark for diplomacy. Future first contact protocols will reference this journey. The old model of cautious distance and suspicion gets replaced by something riskier, but more rewarding. The focus shifts from avoiding danger to discovering connection, from protective measures to open curiosity. The mission report will read like both a diplomatic document and a love story. Their experience demonstrates love overcoming prophylactic fears. Not romantic love in the simple sense. The deeper kind, the willingness to see past biology and into character, to choose understanding over caution. The masks, the protocols, the careful distances, all those protections designed to prevent disaster, become obstacles to real connection when maintained too long. The narrative blends planetary stakes with intimate romance perfectly. The treaty negotiations matter. The trade agreements matter. But they matter because of the people making them. The political becomes personal. The personal becomes political. You can't separate Elira's decision to remove her mask from the future of interspecies relations. They're the same choice. Just at different scales, it offers a hopeful arc from fear to fusion. Not naive optimism. Earned hope. The kind that comes from facing the unknown and choosing curiosity, from surviving solar storms and questionable meals and awkward jokes, from realizing that the things that make us different might be the things that make connection worthwhile. The transformation feels believable because it's difficult, because it costs something. The ending suggests vulnerability as a transformative force, not weakness, strength, the courage to be seen, to risk rejection for the chance of real connection. That becomes the most powerful technology on the ship, more advanced than the Fensari mask, more sophisticated than the Astra's engines. The willingness to be open changes everything. Personal redemption becomes a political turning point. Elias's journey from cautious diplomat to willing partner mirrors humanity's potential evolution. His personal growth becomes a model for his species. The individual choice to embrace difference scales up to planetary significance. One person's courage inspires a shift in how entire civilizations might interact. The implications stretch beyond their story. Future missions might approach first contact differently, with more curiosity and less caution, with more emphasis on shared experiences and less on protective protocols. The focus could shift from what could go wrong to what could we discover. The risks increase, but so do the potential rewards. Their relationship offers a template. Not a perfect one, not a guaranteed success, but a possibility. A demonstration that difference doesn't have to mean distance, that the unknown can be met with wonder rather than fear, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see you, and trust that they'll still be there when the masks come off. The universe watches, not just their two species, others. The success of this mission sends a message. That connection is possible across even radical difference. That vulnerability might be the most advanced form of diplomacy. That the future might be built not on caution and control, but on courage and curiosity, one relationship at a time. The quantum drives hummed their approval, a low vibration through the ship's frame. True connection isn't about finding what's familiar. It demands courage. The guts to look past surfaces, to embrace what's different, to risk discomfort for the chance at real understanding. That's the hard part. Looking at the unknown and choosing curiosity over fear. The most alien thing you'll ever find isn't out there in the black. It's right here. Our own capacity to love what we don't fully understand. To accept what defies our expectations and call it beautiful. She asked the question like she was asking about atmospheric pressure or engine specs. No hesitation. No softening. In human culture, when someone cares for another person, what matters most? The patterns on her mask swirled slowly, neutrally. Just gathering data. Elias almost gave the standard answer. The one about shared values or intellectual connection. But they were past that. The telepathy, the storm, the meals, they'd moved beyond diplomatic responses. He considered the question seriously. It depends who you ask. Some say physical attraction first. Others say shared values or intellectual compatibility. Her mask patterns sharpened. That is 3 different answers. Which is true? All of them. None of them. He ran a hand through his hair. Honestly, I think it's the moment when someone stops being a mystery you want to solve and becomes a person you can't imagine not knowing. The words hung between them. More honest than he'd meant to be. More vulnerable. Elira was silent for a moment. The patterns on her mask shifted to something softer. We prioritize resonance, the alignment of purpose. Physical form is on secondary, a vessel. The difference was clearer now. Humans often started with the surface and worked inward. Fensari started with the core and worked outward. 2 different paths to the same destination. Elias tried to explain the human paradox. How attraction often began with appearance but had to bend to something deeper to last. How the most beautiful face could become ordinary if the person behind it was empty. How an ordinary face could become beautiful when you loved the person wearing it. Real attraction is when someone's differences make them more interesting, not less, he said. The words surprised him. He hadn't realized he believed that until he said it aloud. Elira's mask showed patterns he hadn't seen before. Gentle pulses that moved from the center outward, like ripples from a dropped stone. Your answer suggests that for humans, love is not about acceptance of what is, but discovery of what could be. He hadn't thought of it that way. But she was right. Human relationships weren't about finding someone perfect. They were about finding someone whose imperfections you wanted to learn. They realized their species might be more alike than different. Both sought connection. Both valued character over time. They just took different roads to get there. Humans often got distracted by the scenery along the way. Fensari kept their eyes on the destination. The conversation shifted everything. Interspecies love became less about accepting difference and more about ongoing discovery. Not can I love you despite how you look, but can I love learning who you are? The distinction was subtle but important. Elias looked at her mask, seeing it with new understanding. It wasn't hiding who she was. It was part of who she was. Just one layer of many. The real connection wasn't about removing layers. It was about appreciating them all. They sat in comfortable silence. The question about love had been answered with more honesty than either expected. The vulnerability became another thread in the bond they were building, stronger than cultural differences, deeper than biological barriers. The realization settled between them. Love wasn't a destination you reached. It was a journey you took together. And sometimes the most alien thing you encountered was your own capacity to keep discovering someone. The final treaty session began. Elira arrived on time, precise as always, but the warmth was gone. She spoke in measured diplomatic phrases, her voice flat. The easy rhythm of their previous conversations had vanished. She was all protocol now. Her mask patterns changed. They became complex, layered, guarded. Where before they had flowed like water, now they moved in sharp, precise angles. Like armor locking into place, she avoided looking directly at him during the negotiations. Her gaze stayed on the datapad, the viewport, the treaty documents. Anywhere but his eyes. The comfort they'd built during the storm, over meals and quiet conversations. It felt like a memory. Something that happened to different people. Elias felt the distance like a physical chill. The woman who'd shared her fears in a shaking safe room, who'd risked telepathic connection over a shared meal, that person seemed to have retreated behind a wall of formality. He watched her careful movements, her precise language. The thought arrived unwanted but persistent. Had he been deceived? Had the connection he felt been a diplomatic strategy, a carefully constructed performance to secure a better treaty? He remembered her words in the Arboretum. The shared moments. Were those real, or just part of the negotiation? The person he thought he knew might not exist at all. Maybe she was just very good at her job. Better than he was. Their progress suddenly felt fragile, reversible. The trust they'd built could shatter with one wrong word. One misstep. Everything they'd accomplished, the understanding, the mutual respect, could dissolve back into suspicion. He tried to reach through the barrier. "The storm seems like a long time ago," he said during a break, testing the waters. Her mask patterns didn't change. The storm was an unexpected variable. "We adapted." Her voice gave nothing away. Professional, distant. He felt a cold knot in his stomach. Had it all been adaptation? Survival strategy? Was the connection he felt just two people making the best of a dangerous situation? The treaty was nearly complete. The documents were drafted. The terms agreed upon. On paper, everything was perfect. A successful first contact mission. But Elias felt like he was losing something more important than a diplomatic agreement. He looked at her across the negotiation table. The mask showed nothing but careful, controlled patterns. The same patterns he'd once tried to decode. Now they just looked like a wall. The relational hinge was here. Now, would the truth destroy what they'd built, or would it strengthen it? He had to know. He had to ask the question they'd both been avoiding. "We're almost done," he said. His voice sounded rough. "But I need to know something. Was any of it real? Or was this all just diplomacy?" The mask patterns shifted, just slightly. A flicker of something underneath the controlled surface. The professional facade cracked for just a second, long enough to give him hope. She didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, filled with all the things they hadn't said, all the trust they'd built, all the fear that it might have been an illusion. Then she spoke. Her voice was quieter now, less certain. "What if the answer is both?" He laughed. The sound surprised them both. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was pure, honest wonder. "You look like someone took starlight and taught it to smile," he said. His voice held none of the fear she might have expected. Only awe. The tension wasn't about her appearance. That was the surprise. The revelation terrified him for entirely different reasons. He was terrified by how much he already cared. By how quickly everything had changed between them. By the weight of what came next, he admitted it plainly. No diplomatic language now. "I'm completely terrified," he said. "But not of you. Never of you. I'm scared of how real this feels. Of meeting your people and not measuring up. Of this ending because I'm just a human who got in over his head." Her appearance wasn't frightening. It was breathtaking. The violet light pulsing under her skin. The silver eyes that held entire galaxies. The way her features followed a different kind of logic. A different kind of beauty. It was like seeing color for the first time after a lifetime of black and white. He reached out slowly. Not to touch, just to gesture. To acknowledge the space between them. "I see you," he said. "Not the mask." not the diplomat, you, and it's the most incredible thing I've ever seen. The moment shifted. This wasn't about acceptance anymore. It was about courage. The courage it took for her to remove the mask. The courage it took for him to look without flinching. The courage to choose each other despite every reason to play it safe. They chose to anchor their bond in character rather than fear. In the person she was, not the biology she represented. In the man he'd become because of her, not the commander he'd been before. The connection felt more real than anything either had experienced, built on shared storms and failed jokes and risky meals, on 2 minutes of accidental telepathy that revealed more than years of diplomacy ever could. The personal connection became a political turning point, without either of them trying. Their bond wasn't just about two people. It was a template, a living example of what happened when you chose understanding over fear, when you looked past the surface and saw the person underneath. The treaty waiting for their signatures suddenly felt different. Less like a document and more like a promise to build a future based on what they'd discovered in this room. Not just trade agreements and territorial boundaries, but real connection, real trust. Their bond transformed from private revelation to foundation for relations. What started as curiosity became respect. What became respect became something deeper, something that could change how two species interacted for generations. It wasn't about grand speeches or diplomatic victories. It was about two people choosing each other, and in doing so, choosing a different future for everyone. The mask lay forgotten on the table between them. A piece of technology that had served its purpose. It had protected them long enough to find each other. Now they didn't need protection. They needed honesty. They needed the courage to build something new, something that had never existed before. An alliance built not on fear or advantage, but on the simple, terrifying, wonderful choice to love what you don't fully understand. The Astra slid through space, its engines humming with a new purpose. The star charts showed Fensari space approaching. Navigation beacons pinged softly. The ship felt different now, lighter somehow. The tension that had filled the corridors for weeks had dissolved, replaced by something quieter. Something more certain. Their personal bond now framed everything. The treaty documents sat ready for signing, but the real agreement had already been made in that room when the mask came off. The professional and the personal had merged completely. They weren't just negotiating an alliance between species. They were building a future based on what they'd discovered about each other. The tension now was different. Not about whether they could trust each other. They'd already crossed that bridge. The challenge was translating that trust into something larger, taking what worked between two people and scaling it up to planetary relations, making their personal understanding the foundation for interstellar politics. They stood together on the bridge, watching the approach vectors align. Illyra's unmasked face glowed softly in the dim light. Elias kept glancing at her, not with wonder now, but with familiarity. The alien had become known. The unfamiliar had become precious. "We're going to make history," Elias said. His voice was quiet. "Certain. We already have," she replied. Her silver eyes reflected the star patterns on the view screen. "The history books will record the treaty. They won't record this. The choice we made. The ship carried seeds of something entirely new. Not just diplomatic agreements. A new way of interacting. A template for how different species might connect. Not through careful protocols and maintained distance, but through shared risk and earned trust. Through the willingness to be vulnerable." Diplomacy had become personal and political at the same time. The line between their relationship and their mission had blurred completely. They weren't just representatives of their species anymore. They were living proof that the divide could be crossed. That difference didn't have to mean distance. Their relationship offered a template for future interactions. One where first contact didn't mean suspicion and caution, where masks could come off sooner, where the focus shifted from protecting against potential threats to discovering potential connections. It was riskier. It required more courage. But the rewards were beyond anything traditional diplomacy could achieve. The universe seemed to hum its approval through the quantum drives. The sound was different now. Less mechanical. More musical. Like the cosmos itself was acknowledging their choice. Recognizing that something important had shifted, that a new possibility had been born. Hope emerged from the fear of difference. Not as a naive dream, but as a hard-won reality. They had faced the unknown and chosen curiosity over fear. They had looked at what was different and found value instead of threat. The fear was still there. It would always be there, but it no longer controlled them. Vulnerability became the most transformative technology on the ship. More advanced than the Fensari mask, more powerful than the Astra's engines, the willingness to be seen, to risk rejection, to choose connection over safety. That was the real breakthrough. The thing that would change everything that came after. They watched as the first Fensari orbital station appeared on the view screen. Its design was unfamiliar, all flowing curves and pulsing light. Nothing like human architecture. Elias felt Elira's hand find his. Her skin was cool against his. The violet light pulsed gently where they touched. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready," he said. The ship moved forward into the future they had chosen together.